Mr. Dent, thank you very much. You're absolutely correct. I am absolutely for Prop 123, 100% behind this measure. I have been involved in this campaign since early November, right at the inception. And I can tell you some of the things that I've come across this year have been nothing short of frightening when it comes to equality and the accessibility of our education system for our students. Now, we know Prop 123, you probably heard by now, is about $3.5 billion for our public school system over the next 10 years. That's $3.5 billion. If we look at why it's on the May ballot, why isn't it on the general election ballot? People ask me sometimes. I say, well, if we put it on the general election ballot, the legislature do that. If we didn't have lawmakers like Representative Campbell, Representative Fan, Senator Steve Pierce, the idea behind Prop 123 is to get this money into our schools as quickly as possible. So literally, by the time we're talking about the May 17th election, which is right around the corner, within 1 month, we'll have $230 million going into our public school system. When the next fiscal year turns over in July, we're speaking about more than $300 million. All told, for our schools, that's going to be about $500 million investment. Investment in our teachers, and investment in our students, and investment in our state's future within 1 calendar year of approving Proposition 123. Now, I've probably been warned about 9 times today that most of you have probably voted on early ballots. So I realize I might be speaking in vain, but in the meantime, I'd like to ask you to consider everything I say. And if I do happen to change a mind or two, I would like to maybe have you explore or consider the idea of asking other people to vote for Prop 123. One of the major issues with Proposition 123 is that it takes care of, it puts to bed a 5-year lawsuit. This is an education lawsuit that has been hanging over the state's head, hanging over our school's heads for 5 long years. 5 long years we haven't seen any sizable increase to our schools' budgets. And what has happened? In the meantime, we've had teachers fleeing Arizona. And I don't use the term fleeing loosely. Right now, we're estimated to have about 3,000 vacant teacher positions. 3,000. Right now, right here in Yavapai County, you're losing 1 out of 2 teachers within the first 2 years. That is some frightening statistics. And it's not just here in Yavapai County. It's happening all across the state. I've been to Yuma County, where they're losing teachers to San Diego. The teachers can drive a little bit, and they figured out that they can make $20,000 more if they just go to California. And it's not that long of a drive. Pinal County, we're losing about the same amount to New Mexico. Tucson teachers are making less than a starting teacher in Carson City, Nevada. This is a giant problem that's affecting our state, and that's something that we need to be careful about. We talk about Yavapai County impact. We're talking $4.5 million this fiscal year alone into your schools. Yavapai County has $4.5 million into your schools this fiscal year. Altogether, you have about 20,800 students. You're losing between 1 and 2 teachers within their first 2 years. These are teachers that are making a difference in kids' lives. These are teachers that are going to be making a difference in your grandchildren's lives. We're going to want to think about this, but we're going to want to also think about some of the things that we've heard against Proposition 123. We've heard some of the matter about Prop 123 busting the trust, because the majority of Proposition 123 money is going to be coming from the state land trust. And so if we look at the state land trust, the whole trust land system, I think it is worth taking a good consideration about maybe voting to support Proposition 123. Our land trust is a $5 billion fund. It's a $5 billion fund that's almost doubled within the last 5 years alone. I mean, just think about that, $5 billion. Not to mention this $5 billion in investment money is backed by $70 billion in state lands. $70 billion of our unsold trust lands that are, pretty frankly, going to be sold anyway. Prop 123 doesn't require anybody to sell land faster. We're not looking at a giant furniture blowout liquidation sale of state lands. So all told, we're talking about a $75 billion asset that exists for the very purpose of supporting public education. Proposition 123 seeks to take about $220 million a year from this combined $75 billion asset, $220 million a year to keep our teachers in our classrooms across the state, to keep about 50,000 teachers throughout 2,000 public schools. All told, this is the mathematical equivalent of taking $2 out of an account, $2 out of an account that is $750. $2 account a year for the next 10 years, and by the end of this, we're still going to have a larger trust fund. That's something. When I look at the growth of the land trust, and I've heard the treasurer, and I've spent the past couple of years also working in around the neighborhood of public investments. If I see a trust fund that has almost doubled within 5 years, that definitely stands out. That's not something you're going to come across. I know if my investments doubled within 5 years, I would be working part-time right now. So we look, how does a trust land grow so quickly? Well, it's got the incoming sales of state trust lands, which are about $100 million a year, plus the returns that are coming in on investments. Now, if we want to worry about the corpus or the principal of the fund, let's just assume that, just for argument's sake, that the trust didn't produce one single dime on its investments for this year. And let's say Prop 123 passes. Could we also think it'd be fair if we consider, what about our past excess earnings? What about years where this trust fund has produced 16% returns and yet still distributed only 2.5% to our public schools? So if you think about the amazing size of this education asset, again, this exists for this purpose. We are not taking that much money out of this, and we certainly haven't been using it generously to date. Past 5 years, we're averaging about $65 million a year from this fund to our public school system. So $65 million a year, considering just the general fund appropriations to our schools is around $4 billion, we'll get an appreciation why we all weren't trust land experts about 6 or 7 months ago. So I want to think about that. I want to think about the size. We're talking about the need in our schools that is very, very pressing right now. It is nothing short of a crisis. Now we can talk about the alternatives to Proposition 123. Frankly, the most logical and likely alternative is going to be settling right back into court, into the Maricopa County Superior Court system, where even our schools and our state agree that they would probably expect to spend another 3 years in court before achieving the outcome for all the unsettled legal claims. 3 more years. So you think about what kind of damage we're going to do to our schools without Prop 123 if we sit here and allow our teachers' salaries to remain below $32,000 a year on average for the next 3 years. We keep in mind everywhere else across the state, across the region, across the country, almost everywhere else has higher teacher salaries. And not just a little higher, but much higher. Our system can't take another 3 years of this. And moreover, we run the risk of our state losing a lawsuit that has right now a potential $1.3 billion judgment hanging over the state's head. Now let's just say the judge agrees that, number one, that the schools were owed this $1.3 billion in back pay. What happens if our state loses? Our state is ordered to pay $1.3 billion. It's going to knock our state budget completely out of orbit. There is no way to make up $1.3 billion without raising taxes. So literally, that is what our alternative is. We can go back to court. We can take our chances. Meanwhile, our schools are going to remain the same. We're going to have continually waves of new, inexperienced teachers, and we're going to have our experienced teachers leaving for other states, other counties, especially for rural districts. What I hear a lot is that a lot of teachers are now playing follow the override, where you're losing teachers from rural Arizona, and they're just taking the drive up to Paradise Valley, Arizona, or similar places where they passed an override, because they know they can grab an additional salary. So I strongly consider everybody to vote yes on May 17th on Proposition 123. And I'll also be happy to take any questions whatsoever from anybody. Yes, sir?
How are our academics right now?
Our students are doing pretty well. Our schools have done an admirable job during the recession despite the cuts to school spending. Our schools have done fairly well. Dropout rates nationally are still much higher than we would like them to be, and there's still a lot of progress to be made.
Students are doing well, and it's my understanding that people through this from the money is contributed to students, and it will go to fixed like salary increases. Is that correct?
Yes, teacher salary increases.
And that will cost us more money down the line in pension liability, correct?
One would go to say that it could cost more money down the line in pension liabilities. I think if we want to talk about investments, though, we're going to talk about the earned income increases that our children are going to make from improving their education.
Right, and we should talk about the money that we're getting on raising, $50 million a year goes into education.
Actually, the education trust fund that Prop 123 withdrawals from is called the Permanent Land Endowment Trust Fund. So that is made up from proceeds from sales. So only permanent sales of land, and then also some you have the mineral excavation, things like that. But leases do not go into the Permanent Land Endowment Trust Fund.
Of the sale of the land, who decides which land's going to get sold?
That's an excellent question. If everybody heard this, the question was who decides which lands are going to be sold? The Arizona State Land Department is in charge of identifying parcels, putting parcels up for auction, and it's a public process. So there's absolutely nothing in Proposition 123 that puts any new conditions or directives on the land department. Practically speaking, and I've watched the land department for probably about the past 10 years. In my former life, I was a Capitol reporter. It's a very small agency, and they couldn't probably sell a lot more land each year if they wanted to. So I think our land trust system is generally held in very high regard, and it's under very strict scrutiny. Yes, sir.
In my reading of 123, I don't see where it specifically says the fund should go to the teacher, but merely the school. And the schools include the bus driver, the janitor, the administration, which I fear will go off a major portion. Am I incorrect in my reading?
No, you are absolutely 100% correct. You are 100% correct because it is also important to consider that, number one, what Prop 123 money is returning the inflationary funding back to our schools. Now, in the first place, this inflationary funding wasn't earmarked. It goes into what's called M&O budgets, which are regular maintenance and operation budgets. Now, I can tell you from the dozens and dozens of school districts who have already created, considered, and approved their Proposition 123 budgets, I am not aware of a single district in the state that does not have teacher increases within their Prop 123 budgets. It's also interesting that there's rider legislation that came along with Proposition 123. That becomes inactive in the event Prop 123 passes. That legislation specifically calls out school employees as being a perfectly acceptable payment, or I guess recipient, for Proposition 123 money in FY16, fiscal year 16. So effectively what that means is that these school districts can even apply retroactive pay raises to teachers. When we talk about this inflationary payments, yes, that they were missing out on this amount of money, but of course we forget about what that money is used to buy, and the money is used to pay for our teachers. And one of the values of Proposition 123 is that it's 10 years of ongoing funding, and of course that 10 years provides our school district stabilities. If it was just 1 year of funding, you can buy, a pallet of books, things like that. But if you have that continual certainty that you need, that's how you can start investing in your teachers. Yes, ma'am. Sure. I guess we will start with the proponents first. It's a much longer list. We have all the Prescott Valley's representatives signed in support of Proposition 123. The entire, and I repeat, the entire Republican House and Senate, each and every last member of the Republican delegation of the House and Senate voted to put Proposition 123 on the ballot. Not to mention, of course, we have the absolutely undisputable support from Governor Doug Ducey. We've picked up mayors throughout the state. We've picked up school district members throughout the state. And meanwhile, opposition tended around when it was passing the law came from Democrats. The Democrats are even coming around and agreeing that Proposition 123 is something that simply must pass for the health of our education system this year. Yes, sir.
Is this taking the pressure off of the legislature because the state is supposed to pay the school a certain amount? And you get down the line, and the state is going to have to still come up and pay. So it sounds to me like it's a crapshoot and a temporary Band-Aid fix. It might be for 5 years, but guess what? We're in a bad thing which is paying for the pensions. And if we don't pay our bills as we go, we're going to get further in the hole.
Right.
When you make a minimum payment on a credit card, you never pay it off.
Yes, I absolutely agree, and I'll say that I wouldn't think that any legislators have been left off the hook just by what I've read in Arizona Republic the last 3 weeks alone. I think there's been incredible scrutiny of the legislature. I think we have representatives here that fought tooth and nail to make sure these very schools didn't lose out on funding. Funding from the current year, attendance requirements, funding for all kinds of things. So it's also very, very important. This is a critical distinction, sir. That Proposition 123, what it's here to do is to solve the inflationary lawsuit. The lawsuit over the suspension of the payments of the inflationary spending that went to schools. Now, like 5 years ago when this was happening, this wasn't something that I think the legislature took a lot of joy in doing. Frankly, when the recession hit, the state woke up with about 30 to 40% less revenues than they had traditionally. So it wasn't only just that education got cut, everyone got cut. And you look at it, you probably remember these were the days when the state was selling off school buildings, or selling off public buildings, excuse me. They were fund sweeping. Many of the fund sweeps, I'm sure, you were very familiar with. They affected agriculture, they affected livestock, that sort of thing. So it is a solution to this particular problem in education. It is not a widespread solution that's going to fix everything with our school system. Representative.
I would just like to let you know that the teachers' retirement, ARS, is 100% funded. So you don't want to get the firefighters and public safety personnel pension fund confused with the teachers' pension fund. That pension fund is 100%. So it's not an issue of making that fund worse. That fund is fine. And the second thing I would like to say is that if we didn't do the way we're doing this, we would have had a massive tax increase, and that would have had to go before the voters too. To increase taxes to fund this lawsuit against the legislature. And that leads to the third issue, is a constitutional crisis. No judge can order the legislature to raise taxes. It just never happened. So this is a compromise. 100%, no one is 100% happy with it. We worked a year on this, so just know it is the best answer we can come up with without raising taxes. Going to the voters, we probably would have been defeated because of the high threshold to raise taxes. So I just wanted to say that. I voted for Prop 123. Well, these are not easy issues.
Well, how did the state get themselves in the hole not paying the school to begin with? Does this go back to jail?
Real quickly, it does. The governor of Napolitano put a whole bunch of money into education right before she left office. And when she left, the voters had passed what? The opposition?
301.
and 301 mandated a 3% inflationary very higher base level since Governor Napolitano had put a lot of money in and raised the normal spending that we do on education. That trajectory of trying to make those payments, missed for 5 years, compounded at 3%, was almost impossible. In fact, we were briefed by the bean counters, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee. It would not have ever happened. So this lawsuit was settled. We got rid of it, and if we pass 123, we don't have to deal with this back 3%. Plus, 123 capped the money that we're going to spend on education to 2%, and only if certain economic triggers are met. If the economy's doing good, we'll fund public education at 2%. If the economy starts to stall, we can go down to 1%. And if the economy really goes bad, we don't have to fund education at all. So we protected the taxpayer. And for that, I think we deserve a little credit. I mean, we're looking out for you as best we can. So,
Yes, sir. That's absolutely correct.
Okay, when's the next time we're going to get
Probably the beginning of next fiscal year, because we're talking about teachers.
We have voted for teacher increases all the time. Teachers get up, and I have 2 teachers in the family member, another family member who was a teacher, a principal, and is now involved in the school system in another capacity. And we always vote that you give them raises, and it's never enough. And taxes are going to go up no matter what. Maybe this is a good solution, maybe it isn't. I don't like the idea of selling off land because values will go up. Things are very bad right now. And in perpetuity, the money that we will be making on these lands will go up also. I don't think it's a short-term fix to a long-term problem.
Right, I think it's important to consider, number one, that this land is already sold for this exact purpose. That's why the federal government granted it, separated it, and named our K-12 schools the owners. There are about a dozen other owners that make up about 10% of the trust beneficiaries, but this land is absolutely, I mean, it's beautiful, some of it is, and much of it, I'll add, it is bought for the purpose of preservation, which is a great thing. But I mean, as for like, it's not like the land becomes dead value after it's sold. After it's sold, it's added to our tax rolls. So then in turn, it starts producing money again for our schools through local property taxes. Yes, sir.
Do you understand you think this land is already sold?
It's already being sold, yes. So Prop 123 doesn't create the whole system where state trust lands are sold to fund education. State trust lands have already been sold for decades and decades and decades for the purpose of supporting public K-12 education. Yes, sir.
Prop 101 money, sales tax generated, we pulled the inflation from it, $300 million. That's general revenue. People need to understand that they're going to take education money out of the trust to pay off a general revenue debt. That's number one. The other part is there's no accountability where that money's going to go. We started this whole thing off with teachers. There's no guarantee that money's going to teachers. So people need to understand that I'm against it, but this bill is terribly flawed, and it's a scam. People need to understand this.
Okay, I'll try to decide where to react to that. I think when you look at our legislature and the members of our legislature, who are of course the majority, are Republican lawmakers, we could look at our scenario. We could look at an economy that's emerging out of a recession. Now, for the first time since, about the mid-2000s, we finally have what's called a budget surplus. We finally built down a rainy day fund. We literally learned, probably not even 10 years ago, the wisdom in problems that we bring by spending down all of our general fund money. So I think that you really saw a very sincere effort to avoid that future problem for Arizona. And one of the reasons that they looked at the land trust, I wasn't there in deliberations, but I can guarantee you, these were factors I would consider. Number one, the land trust right now is currently operating with a 2.5% distribution level. That is very, very small.
Who established that level?
That would be the governor in 2012. That would be in 2012 because before that it was on a variable rate. And for a variable rate, for the first time in Arizona history, created exactly $0 for our schools in 2010. So we have a fund that has grown incredibly rapidly. It's almost doubled within the last 5 years alone. I don't have to point out who was the treasurer. I can say that if you look at the numbers, he was the best treasurer our state has ever had. He averaged greater than 12.5%, and he became the wealth.
Treasurer that supports him. Every other treasurer has said this is a bad deal. Every other living treasurer. So the point is, he's the only treasurer that likes it.
Sure, I understand that. I hear that quite a bit, and I tell people, if I had, I know it's true. I'm not doubting that. I read the article. I know that we talked to the public, talked to former treasurers, the current treasurers. I can say that Doug Ducey was the best treasurer our state's had. Last year, the treasurer's office received about a 5% return, which they did pretty well during the markets. Doug Ducey in his last year in office as treasurer produced more than 16% returns. So he was an outstanding treasurer. He's credited, even DeWitt's office has publicly credited him in the past for what he did to change this trust portfolio. And I think the results speak for themselves with the growth that we've seen in the trust. As for the distribution rate, whether we're touching upon our future money or future kids, we have to realize that we're coming up to a 6.9% rate. Where does that stand? Yes, that's high. Where does 2.5% stand? And the answer is very conservative. The average public endowment distribution is about 4%, while 5% is the absolute minimum the federal government will let you distribute as a private endowment. So for the period of 10 years, there isn't a lot of great concern among most people for the health of the trust. Thank you so much, everybody.